Hi everyone, Travis here. Just letting you know we separated this from our other podcast. So this episode is just us talking about Neon Genesis Evangelion and the Rebuild of Evangelion movies that came out afterwards. If you want to check out the other podcast, it should be the one right before this, episode 39. Thanks. All of Rebuild is on Amazon now, which sparked me to watch the
What?
fourth one. And you said you watched Rebuild
Oh
1 and 2,
no.
didn't you? I want to hear
Yeah,
about the
I
Rebuild
did.
1 and 2. All right, hey,
I
all right,
thought we
one
were
sec.
doing this
Yeah,
next
we are.
week.
We could talk a little bit about it and then we'll finish the thoughts later, but I'm curious. I will say, like, I read these mangas like in middle school in like
Yeah.
2002, and then the anime came on Adult Swim at some point, and you were able to kind of watch it all on there. Rebuild 1 came out in 2007, and initially I was like, oh, is this just a movie compilation of the first like couple episodes? This is cool. I like new animation and stuff. And then there's a little bit different in the end. And then it starts getting more different and more different. And then, it kind of goes from there. But what's up? How did one go for you?
I mean, one went well enough. Yeah, like one, you look at Rebuild or Evangelion Rebuild 1.11. You Are Not Alone, I believe, is the full title. Which is just the most indulgent shit. It is mostly like a retelling of the first couple of episodes of Evangelion up until the like the geometric angel, like the geometry shifting angel that fires a laser, right? Uh, it's like it's fine, right? Like that first movie is just a lot more expensive Evangelion. It is, like this is being told as a movie, so like they can give it like a hard R, right? So they can have a scene like the scene where Shinji, the depressed protagonist, like the awkward teenage depressed protagonist of this entire like franchise, walks into Rei's apartment, um, and like sees her like coming out of the shower like with a towel, like instead of having to censor that by like making her like giving her the sort of physiology of like an actual like doll, they can render her like naked, like it is like it's a bit awkward in all the ways that Evangelion has always been awkward. It's expensive in the ways that Neon Genesis wasn't allowed to be during its production, and it's a bit indulgent in the ways that I would expect something from Hideki Anno to be indulgent.
Yeah, I will say like I have like the two biggest criticisms and things that end up making me not like want to recommend this to people is the shitty fan service and like the weird ways that like
Yeah,
what I would say
I
like bad comedy, raunchy comedies of like this, Animal House shit where I'm walking into someone who's changing, but mix that with like
yeah.
this story that's also trying to be like psychological and like a twist on the usual like mech anime like Gundam where it's trying to subvert Gundam,
Well,
but then when it
I
does the
don't.
high school stuff it just drops the ball there. But I think everything else kind of works for me in certain ways.
I mean, the thing is, I don't know if like I don't know if I'd say anything in Evangelion is subversion. Like we talk about, Gundam, like things like focusing on like horny, depressed teens, that kind of thing. Like that has always been there. Like even that first series of Gundam that is like functionally like a way to sell toys. Um, Most of that series is like Amuro being really depressed. It is like notably every male character on the white base being horny for Lieutenant Matilda when she shows up, and then being extremely sad when she dies. So like Evangelion is just about these things that show up in mech anime, but like are never necessarily primarily the focus. Like in I also wouldn't say like there is fan service, right? Like the way that the camera lingers on Misato is very fan servicey. But like I don't know if I would ever say that like the way it lingers on like the teens, its main like characters is particularly fan servicey. Like the raunchy comedy is, you know, it can be as clever as like raunchy comedy can be in some ways. Like in the like first raunchy joke where like Shinji goes to take like a bath, and then the penguin that lives in Masato's apartment comes out of like out of the shower, and he gets like freaked out, and he opens the door to ask Masato what's up, and like the joke here is that like his genitals are being covered by the beer can, and then he lifts the beer can, and they're still being covered by like a much smaller can. Like that's about as clever as it gets, and like that stuff is
Yeah,
humorous
that's a pretty
enough.
good bit.
And I don't think like like we talked like I just talked about the part where Ray, who is another Eva pilot, the Evangelions being giant mechs, like Ray, who's the other pilot, like the part where she's like now like fully like nude as opposed to being like somewhat censored in the TV release of this anime. It's still awkward, right? Like it's still a very awkward scene that you don't want to be in. Like it's not a scene that's like trying to let you like ogle this teenager. It is as you are as awkward and quite frankly disturbed by like the encounter you're in the middle of as Shinji is. It's like I kind of go back and forth, but I think it wants to do with fan service. I mean, that being said, like in the way that it lingers on other people, like it's still like Hideki Anno is still just eternally horny, you
Yeah,
know?
and I remember the manga had a lot more stuff that wasn't censored than like the TV show did too.
Yeah,
I
I'm
I
sure.
will say it was, but it was as close to the TV show as you could possibly get though. Like they
Yeah.
didn't really cut much. Um,
I know in the TV show like they cut like the death of one of the like supporting characters that happens in the when like in Neon Genesis when that kid is selected to be the pilot
yeah,
of Evangelion Unit 3. Like in the show, like in the manga that kid dies.
yeah, and the Toji
Um
dies in the manga, and the show he was in a coma,
yeah,
and
he gets put into a coma.
and then
In this one he doesn't get in the mech.
yeah, and like I will say the stuff I liked in Rebuild because a lot of stuff that happens when I have like originally like watched or read these series is I think a lot more about like the angel fights and the mech stuff and like the surface level psychology of just like Shinji dealing with all this shit, and I try not to remember as much as the fan service or the weird like that shower scene is always weird whenever I come back to it. I have always
Yeah.
not thought how to feel about it because it's an
Well, it
adult
it
writing
wants you.
teenagers. Don't know if this is
Yeah.
something that happened to the author or if it's just something that is like I'm trying to create this thing where like Ray doesn't care that this happened. Shinji's really awkward about it. There's his dad's glasses, and then you find out later that her room is like the exact cloning room that kind of where she was quote unquote born because Ray ends up being like his mom.
Yeah, like a clone of Shinji's
Yeah.
mother. Like, yeah, like it is it it wants that it like that is a scene that it is awkward. It wants you to feel awkward about it. Like it wants you to like be like it wants you to want to leave that situation as quickly as possible, right? Which is like something that like they do in Neon Genesis is like that show is filled with these long single frame shots that you're just held hostage in for like minutes at a time, and I think really effectively. And I like the thing. Hideki Anno is not a Nobuo. I'm trying to read this name real quick. Nobuo Watsuki, right? Like Hideki Anno is not the guy who made Kenshin, right? Who is and that creator, that manga, that anime creator, is someone who like we know has interacted with like child pornography, right? Like that is a very gross person. Like Hideki Anno is not this person. Hideki Anno is just like in the words of his like first boss, Hao Miyazaki. Just kind of sometimes he's just fun to bully, like he's a bit of an alien in some ways. Like he's just strange,
He's almost like I think that's where a lot of like Shinji's kind of stuff comes from is you write
Yeah,
your characters and you throw like the meanest stuff about you into your that you think about yourself and your
yeah,
characters.
yeah. Like if he's the other thing, something that I haven't watched yet, but I'm going to watch as soon as I'm done with like the rebuilds. Like once I get these final two rebuild movies in, is that documentary about the making of this last rebuild, which is on Amazon Prime if you want to watch
Oh,
that.
cool, cool.
Um, yeah, like just like type in Ano, right? Like his last name, you just type in Ano and you'll get
Because
it.
it since
Um,
2007, the Rebuild 4 came out like last year, so it's been 16 years for these four movies,
yeah,
which is not. It's wild to think about, but also the last like 3 or 4 volumes of Neon Genesis kind of also took that long because the series started kept going to 26 episodes before the manga finished because it that ran
yeah,
faster, and so he kind of wrote the ending to the TV show and then wrote the ending to the manga and then kind of did something different in End of
and
Eva, and then there's
yeah,
Death True 2, which is like a compilation movie that also recontextualizes stuff, and then there's Rebuild. So there's a
yeah.
lot of weird endings or ways that he kind of does stuff differently, which I think changes as what he wants the ending of this series to be, which I think is also
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, yeah, because like the thing about Ano is like it's something this documentary points out is he does suffer from like depression, you know. There are like parts of the documentary, like quotes I've seen where his staff talk about the fact that Ano there are some times like you just don't know if Anna's going to show up, you know? Like he could just not show up for days on end and people are like, okay, he's going through an episode of depression, you know, like he's really going through it right now. We're going to keep doing our work and when he comes back we'll have like new stuff to show him and hopefully that'll like help him out a bit. Um, and there's also like the other quote from Hayao Miyazaki, which is like Ano creates when he's spilling blood, right? Like when he's in pain, is when he makes stuff, and it's it's a lot. It can be a lot to absorb, and it's like it comes across as a lot, like in his work.
Yeah,
Um,
like God, I watched four. Some parts of that movie made me cry. There's some better stuff in that, and then there's also like the fan service stuff, which you roll your eyes at. Like it's also just whenever a female character gets into a plug suit, it's just weird.
yeah,
But then there's
yeah,
everything else. Like one of the parts that I really think is better than fan service, which can also be that, is there's like the weird. It's not like the typical pool episode or hot springs episode, but it is where like Asuka gets a bikini and is talking about that and is trying to be flirty with Shinji, and he just cannot handle that at all. And I've like that's definitely things that have happened to like teenagers, and I've been in weird stuff where you're like, what is flirting? I don't know what this is. I don't know what to say to this. Weird
yeah,
situations like that where I think are a little more sincere than like showing a character having like jiggle animations while they're getting in a plug suit. There are
yeah. Like
vast like swings like that.
yeah, and like he's always like kind of taken those approaches. Like in Neon Genesis, like the episodes that are mostly about like Shinji and Asuka like living in Misato's apartment like together and like trying to like sort of build an understanding of each other, are a lot of that. Like there's that whole sequence in one of the episodes where Asuka like is looking at like Shinji like and part of her whole deal in Neon Genesis specifically is that she's really attracted to Kaji, who is a character who shows up as like her handler basically when she's transferring over from European like military to nerve to Japanese like nerve. Um, and like she's like constantly trying to get this person to see her as a desirable like romantic partner. And thing is that she's 14 and he's an adult and he's not interested in her in that way. Like the one credit I'll give Kachi is that he's not interested in a 14-year-old.
Yeah, and then
But
that's
but he is
sorry, go for it.
interested in he's very interested in Masato, right? So what builds there is like Asuka is trying to learn how to interact with people romantically, and Shinji is her age and is not particularly annoying. So she tries to she tells Shinji like I want to like do an adult kiss with you, right? And it's this really awkward scene where they just like put their faces together and they just don't do anything for like a solid minute, and like their faces get like blue because they're not breathing and they don't know what to do, and they pull apart and they're just like, this was terrible, this was so stupid, why did we grow
Yeah,
up
and
since
I'm
we
trying to
this?
think, as because you watch Rebuild 2, do they kind of stick with some of that stuff? Like they do the can gag with Asuka when she comes out of the shower with Pen Pen too, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah, they do double down on that gag. It's not as interesting. um yeah, they do
Yeah.
double down on that
And then
gag.
the thing I was thinking about is like, so I'm watching Death True 2, which is the compilation movie of the series, and they
Yeah,
do go on and narrate scenes that normally aren't, but with other character dialogue. And there's a lot of Asuka being like, "I wish Shinji was more confident. I wish he was more like a man like Kaji and stuff." And that's like,
yeah,
she wants someone her age to be like that, but they're not at that point yet. And I think that like describes both of their characters really well.
yeah. Like there are like Shinji and Asuka are very similar characters, like actually. When you look at like Asuka's backstory and like what being an Eva pilot means to her. The thing here is that like they express it in very difficult, like very different ways. Where Shinji is like this very shy kid looking for any hint of praise he can get from his dad. Asuka has never really had that luxury of being able to get that from anyone. And so like how she compensates for that is like she is just hyper confident. Like of the three Ava pilots, she is probably the best of them, right? When it comes down to like fighting, I think like End of Eva kind of cements that in that like one just excellent action sequence. Um, but like like in the rebuild, they go through that sequence where that angel is just like falling into Earth and like unfurls, and like Asuka has to work with Rei and Shinji to kill it, and she tries to do it on her own, she can't really, and like the aftermath of that is like she goes into Shinji's room and she like lays down on his bed like right behind him, and like they are back to back, and they just have this like heart to heart where she decides to stop calling him coattails, right? Because as far as she knew, he had just gotten into the Eva program because his dad is the commander,
Was
and decides that she's
yeah.
going to call him the idiot
Was
Shinji,
that in
right?
Rebuild 2 or some of the episodes? 'Cause
It's a bit of both,
yeah,
right? Like
it's because it's
it's
been
in
a bit. It's
Rebuild.
been a bit.
Yeah, it's in Neon Genesis, and it's also in 2.22. Like what's not in a lot of 2.22 is like is high school, right? Like they have scenes where they are in school, they interact with each other in school, but it does not focus on like what the school in a place like Neo Tokyo, or not Neo Tokyo, Tokyo 3 is, right? Because in Neon Genesis, we learn that that school is actually where they keep a number of Ava pilots, like potential Ava pilots. Um, and that's not a narrative thread that Rebuild 2.22 sort of grabs onto at all.
Yeah, and I will say to circle back around to Rebuild 1, it's like the first fight scene with the, I think in this one they call it the third or fourth angel. I think they numbered the angels differently in this. I think it was
Yeah,
4, but it's normally
yeah, it's
3. It's
Angel
the
4.
first fight. It's like the first episode. That I have such fond memories of that fight because it's like this dark city, and the Ava had kind of this neon, the green on it because it's like a all purple with green like accents are like
Yeah.
highlighted in the dark city, and that fight is just so like the animation is just so. Was it? Is it CG or does it look more like hand drawn in Rebuild 1? Because they do a little more
I
CG in 2
they
and
they
3.
do a lot of I don't I don't think in 2 I don't think it looks too CG. I think it still looks kind of hand drawn. Wasn't really paying attention. In some of the Emma fights,
Yeah.
I think like they mostly go with like before.
Okay, I'm looking at this. I'm pretty sure this is the Avas are hand drawn because by the time you
Yeah,
get
like
to
before they
3 and 4, they use a little more
two.
CG.
Yeah, like by the time you get to like I don't think anything's really like CG until you get to the geometric prism angel,
Yeah,
right? I think that's like the big thing. Like that's the big like 3D CG monster that happens in like some of the city. Um, I think like for the first two films, like the Evas are mostly like hand drawn or like look hand drawn.
yeah. I think
And
you're right on
that's
that
the other thing
one.
is this is are really expensive. Like, like I seeing these movies, I did not like approach them being like, I want to see like Evangelion with like more of a budget, right? Like that was kind of the least important thing to me. But also every time like these movies do something that looks really expensive, I'm like, oh, this is sick. Like there's just like there'll just be that section like where like that angel's coming down from space and Shinji has to like run on the underground like plates of Tokyo 3 to like get to it, right? And they're like throwing platforms up so that way Shinji can like accelerate indefinitely so he can get to where that angel is falling. And I'm like, oh, this is sick. Like this stuff is cool as hell.
Yeah, like a lot of my hype comes from like, as well as like the character stuff, that I think like the city they set up and Tokyo 3, just the skyscraper, them being able to modulate it and move the skyscrapers and the places people are living down
Yeah.
to create like this, because it is supposed to be a battleground for angels to come to. It's like their last line of defense
Yeah. Like
before,
pe
you know, them trying to get to
people live
Adam or
in Tokyo
whatever.
3.
What?
Yeah, like people live in
Yeah.
Tokyo 3 in the rebuilds. Like Neon Genesis Tokyo 3 is very empty, right? Like Tokyo 3 does not have that kind of bustle in the way that it does in the rebuilds.
Yeah, they definitely are different, and it's cool. I originally thought, some people come up with it and say it is or isn't, could be both, but a lot of people are like, oh, Rebuild is just the cycle moving on and is a sequel to End of Eva, in the sense that like, right, like Asuka and Shinji are Adam and Eve and they are starting the cycle over again, and it's happening differently, and that maybe Kaji, not Kaji, who's the last angel who's also a
Ku,
human?
I believe it's Kuro.
Yeah, he continued. He met the first Shinji and this Shinji, but it ends up being might be a little different in four. I don't know that. I always, either that's a fan theory or not. I've always thought that was like a neat way to think about these as well, because they do like, watching Rebuild 2. It has a point where it breaks off from like episode 15, and it goes a different way. Like Asuka is now the person who is in the new like unit 3 that they're getting, the black one that's corrupted by an angel, and he
Yeah.
kills Asuka, and then Third Impact starts.
Well, no. What happens is they go through like that whole thing where Asuka like they go through that whole like same sequence where like Unit 01 gets taken over by like the dummy plug because Shinji's not going to fight the Eva and potentially kill Asuka. Um, so like they have that whole sequence. The Eva like rips Asuka's pot out, bites down on it, injures her, and like she becomes contaminated with angel stuff or something. So they have to put her into quarantine. Um, and then like not Asuka, the a new character called Mary, who is I believe like an American,
A Mary Sue
shows up.
almost.
Sure, I don't know.
That's
Shows
just a
up,
meme. Sorry.
yeah, and takes control of Unit O2, Asuka's unit, and fights the angel that shows up after Shinji decides to leave the program. And so she fights that, like has Unit O2 go into like some like berserk mode, and during that fight, like Ray comes up, attempts to basically nuke the angel using the N2 mines, which I guess there's like they can't maybe nuclear bombs are not something they want to like sort of bring up in fiction for very understandable reasons. And like it doesn't kill the angel, it does fry Ray's unit 0, like the prototype unit she's in, and then Ray gets eaten by the angel, which then like becomes like a sort of like large like like very tall woman who begins like burrowing into Nerve, and then Shinji comes back, fights it, and like rips Ray out of the angel, and that's when like that sort of that fusion between the two. Um, because like Ray is also like now in Eva Unit 01, right, which is like as also tied to Shinji's mother in some way, um, because like of that interaction with those two, and the fact it's happening in Unit 1 Third Impact starts, and as Third Impact is starting, a spear descends from the sky and skewers Unit 01, and Kuro and Unit 6 descend
Oh yeah, yeah. Unit 6, which is
from the
Kaoru's
moon.
fucking.
Yeah, they were building that on the moon.
Which I think is like the tease at the end of the first movie, which is like him on the moon
Yeah,
looking up.
without like any
Yeah.
sort of like without any sort of spacesuit, like breathing normally.
Which yeah, that when that shows up, it's like holy fuck, this thing is fucking crazy looking because he had this suit and some other stuff, but this was like the first time it really showed up. It's an Ava Unit 6, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah. Well, he exists for like an episode, right? Like he in the Neon Genesis, he's there for an episode, because he's there to like show up, be really nice to Shinji, make Shinji like basically feel okay for the first time in the series, as he also has to reconcile the fact that like he might he might be bisexual, you know, and, like has to like sort of has Shinji like begin reconciling with that, and then starts doing angel shit, tries to get to Lilith, and then Shinji has to kill him, and like the final shot of that episode is Shinji holding him in like the hand of his Evangelion, and basically being told that he has to kill Kuro and like crush him. And it's just this like long 1 minute extended single cell shot where nothing moves until the screen cuts to black and you hear um, his body being crushed by the Evangelion's hand.
Yeah, and I know like the manga does a lot more with him besides like 2 episodes, and he shows up in like after that stuff you have all these side like PSP games or like dating sim adjacent stuff where you're playing the plot of the series but different things happens, and he ends up getting like piloting Unit 2 and some other stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, the first 2 rebuilds are interesting. I am 3 and 4 are so different. Can't wait to talk about that. I might go rewatch 3 because 3 a bunch of weird stuff happens in 3 as well. Do you know anything about 3?
Yeah. Only that like Asuka shows back up and has an eye patch.
Yeah. Okay. It'll be. It'll be. It takes a turn. It's very unexpected, and they talk about like having in my mind having like End of Eva happen almost at like um Rebuild 2 is interesting, or having like
Yeah.
something close to like the human instrumentality thing, or like the I'm trying to remember if any of the inside Shinji's head stuff happens in Rebuild 2 where he's like talking to himself on the
Um.
train or talking to like
Yeah.
his
Like
dad and stuff.
that's still there. So like you have the stuff on the train, right? Which is always like when it's really just wants to be about Shinji dealing with his emotions and his sort of aversion to any sort of emotional pain, right? Like they do have that conversation on the train. It's like the last sort of conversation he has with himself before he leaves or attempts to leave Tokyo 3. Um, but like the final thing is basically third impact, right? Not like human instrumentality, but like full on third impact, like probable like death of the entire human population on Earth.
Yeah, because I'm trying to remember what they call it, but it's when Shinji's doing all that stuff in his mind, but it is the being in End of Eva that's the giant ray asking Shinji what should happen to people. And episode
That is
25 and 26 and End of Ava both have him making different decisions as well.
yeah, that's human
Gotcha. All right.
instrumentality.
Yeah.
That is because that's like Gendo, like the chamber of Guff has opened, you know. Gendo Akari's like final plan to like bring all of human consciousness, like all of human consciousness has ever been, ever was, and ever will be into one singular being, so that way he can see his wife again.
Yeah.
Because Gendo Akari is the ultimate wife guy, much like Hideki Anno.
And may or may
Um,
not bring a end to war, which is how he justifies it first. Like, yeah, there's going to be war,
yeah.
but I want to see my wife.
Yeah, well, that's how he justifies it to the like multinational conglomerate of like floating obelisks he reports to, Seal. right? Like that's how he justifies it to them. It's like, this is going to end war, y'all. And they're like, okay, cool, we want to do this. And they're like, wait, this is going to end war by making everyone a singular entity. We don't want this. And Gendo's like, too bad, I want to see my wife.
Get
And that's how
fucked.
like the conflict of End of Eva happens, and also like the
Yeah.
conflict at the end of the final two episodes, because like you're seeing the results of that conflict partially in those episodes.
Yeah, and I think that stuff I've always liked too. Just when it gets weird like that, and it's just like, how did this being get created? I don't know. There's the
Yeah,
black moon. There's the black egg and the white egg and all this other fucking
yeah.
when
Well, I mean, like people,
angels showed up on Earth and humanity also showed up on Earth.
yeah, like I don't know, like people, like the fact that the ending of the of Neon Genesis is controversial is like always a bit silly to me. Like that's where that show was going, and like the show was always about Shinji and like Ano's like its creator as well as its like characters like struggle with like depression and accepting like the amount of work that you have to put into being a person. Um and, like the show is like I think a has a perfect conclusion to that, and I think End of Eva's conclusion is, no less sincere, but like so much less hopeful,
Yeah.
and also like just a big bummer.
Well,
And I think it's valuable in a way, but I don't necessarily mess with it in the way that I care to mess with like the end of Neon Genesis. But I'm interested in seeing like what the what 3.0 plus 1.0 is gonna do with that.
yeah, it's different. I'm not going to spoil it and or talk about it till next week. But End of Ava, I there's like a bunch of stuff in that movie I really like, and then at the end, Asuka's like Shinji's like choking trying thinking about choking Asuka on the beach and does and then doesn't and then like is this some nihilism shit? Do you not care?
Oh,
Are you angry about people liking your characters?
no, he's
What the
just like,
fuck?
I mean, there's the story of like, like Ano was getting death threats, and he was getting death threats over the end of Neon Genesis Evangelion. Um, to the point like, so there's a story that like End of Ava was a reaction to that, being like F all of you. I just I think End of Ava is like is very nihilistic. It is very much like, yeah, you have to it's hard to do this kind of work, but you have to do it, and Shinji may or may not succeed, right? Like because the person that he has wronged the most by End of Ava's conclusion is Asuka, both because of what happens in the first 5 minutes of the film, as well as what happens at the end of that really rad fight scene. Um, it's like he's perpetually like wronged this person, and when confronted with the fact that he's like stuck on Earth with just this person, and he will have to deal with the fact that he has done terrible things to her, attempts to kill her, and then can't do it. Which is why her final words to Shinji are pathetic.
Yeah, and like it's like that stuff is so weird. But then I love the human instrumentality bit where he's in his own head, and the fight scenes are really good. And then breaching nerve is really fucking violent and like turn my stomach in like a way that doesn't happen, but it's also like fucked up and true and like thinking about like military like um interactions like that. And yeah, I think Rebuild does a better job. We talked when these originally came out. I think Rebuild does a better job of telling. Like, I like the first 15 episodes of Neon Genesis. I think it goes in weird, different places after that. That some of them are really good, some of them are like really bad, and then you get to 25 and 26, and you're like, this stuff's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. Like once the sort of the monster of the week structure of Evangelion kind of Neon Genesis falls apart, it's a mixed bag what you get in those final episodes, especially as it revolves around like Nerve and Misato and Kaji, and like how that sort of relationship plays out within that show specifically like sucks.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think the manga stopped at about 16, episode 16-ish when the series was over. So the manga gets different after that point as well because he hadn't written that stuff yet. So it's keeps the similar stuff, but it doesn't. So anyway, that's our 30 minutes into Evangelion.
yeah, there'll be
There will
more.
be more. Thank you for talking to me about this, Austin.
Absolutely.
I I watched this so young, and I like a lot of stuff about it, and then there's stuff I don't agree with and would have done differently. But I'm also
Yeah,
did not experience these things like the the author of these or the people who worked on them.
yeah. It's just like, it's a fundamentally flawed work that is like that like this creator has spent the better part of like wow, like 30 years
Yeah,
like re-rising and revisiting in a really interesting way. I think one of the most interesting things about like one of those interesting things you can find like pre-Rebuild is a quote at the end of his wife's manga where he talks about how like the thing to note here, Takeano loves his wife, is a wife guy. Like he leaves a note at the end of her manga that is her work is so inspiring, like it makes the reader it does not allow the reader to turn away from reality in the way that most fiction does, and instead encourages them to like look at the world around them, interact with it, and be ready to go into it to create something and to like do something about it. And like the final line is like of that quote is like it's something that he fundamentally failed to do with Evangelion and is like very proud to have seen her do in this manga.
yeah. I will. I'll definitely have to. I am on like I have like an anime kick where I'll get onto it and I'll watch a bunch of stuff. So I could definitely watch some of that after I finish my dip back into Ava for a little bit. Because I will recommend maybe give it some time after Rebuild 4, maybe not. But they there are the two compilation movies, and Death True 2 is really interesting, and that's on Netflix as well as End of Ava. I might just look at End of Ava to think about the differences between Rebuild 4 because I hadn't watched those since they came out on Netflix 2 years ago, which was when that boom of people rewatching those. And
Yeah.
then Angelic Days is a spin-off manga and TV show. It's just the Neon Genesis characters without the mechs and the angels, and they're just in high school, and it's kind of fun.
Yeah.
And it's not
Yeah.
pervy and weird. It doesn't have any. It's just it tells a pretty straight
Yeah, it's just like
teen,
chibi, right?
yeah,
Like as a real like
slice of life.
chibi aesthetic. Yeah.
Well, there's one that's a chibi aesthetic, and then there's one that's
That
just
is
a slice of life with a
yeah.
little bit of weird stuff. Like I think there might be some angel stuff in there. I don't remember, but one of them was just a manga, which is Angelic Days. Yeah,
Okay.
because it continues Shinji's dream sequence in episode 26, where he wants the slice of life stuff. And there's some angels that show up too, I think, but it's more that. Anyway,
All right.
back to news. Heyo, Frostpunk 2.
I just want to do more news.
Now we can stop it
Um,
here. I don't care. I think
I
we
mean,
can stop.
yeah, I think we can end
All
with
right.
like Ava. Like none of this is like I mean, as much as like, like the story about Activision Blizzard's QA department like sucks. Like everything involved in that story is terrible. Want to hopefully like the workers as they like form an actual movement are going to bring QA testers in here um, because like this is an important discipline in game development and needs to be taken seriously and needs to like have improved conditions. Um,
Yeah, 15 an hour compared to like making 50,000 a year is very different. Is what some of these like QA testers were
yeah,
making,
well,
which comes out
it's
to like
15 an hour.
25K a year.
Yeah, it's like 15 an hour in California, right? Like it's not helpful.
No.
They're also like all on contract, right? They are on contracts that like vary from like 3 to 12 months. Um, it's it's super bad, and they're all like worked to the point where like they can't get any sort of help in or like go through programs that would help them like get any sort of like vertical like upward movement in the company, that kind of thing. QA in games has sucked for a long time. It has like that it has like an infinite sort of like replenishing supply of like bodies that people can throw into it, and so we don't like think about it in that way. And it sucks. And
Yeah.
like we need to do better in QA. Like I remember like Grand Theft Auto, like I mean not Grand Theft Auto, Red Dead Redemption had like a huge story going on about it. It's like how shitty its QA department was.
Yeah, I was about to bring up, like, Rockstar has a weird one too. I think one of theirs is like in Lincoln, UK, and then there's some, because my friend lives by there, and she's like, I don't know if I should work. I love Red Dead 2, but I should probably not work for them. Being a QA tester will ruin this game for me. And
it's like it's like that kind of thing with like QAs, like to be aware of that. It's a Kotaku report. It sucks.
Yeah, it's called Activision Blizzard's QA department seems like a hellhole by Ari Notice. Definitely good read to look into. Well, I think that'll wrap it. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining me, Austin. I'm glad to talk to you about video games and anime.
Always a pleasure.
Yes, good times. Till next week. Catch you later.
This is the part where I would start reciting the lyrics to Oh Beautiful Death, Oh Sweet Death, which is the song that pops up in End of Eva, but I don't know any of them, so I'm just going to say bye.